All right, welcome to our chat. My name is Carolyn Yoder. I'm the executive editor of Calkins Creek Books, and it is my honor to introduce Selene Castrovilla, the author of Revolutionary Friends. And Selene and I have known each other for a very long time. We are friends ourselves. And so I'd like to start off with maybe talking a little bit, Selene. We both love history. And how did your love begin, and why write about American history?
Carolyn, it's so funny because I always knew I was a writer from when I was a child, but history always bored me when I was a kid because they taught you just like memorize this date, memorize, this event. But I never learned about the people really. You learned the basic things about George Washington, but over and over again, the same things, nothing that really humanized him. So when I discovered that he had a spy ring on Long Island, I couldn't believe it because I grew up I still live on Long Island. I grew up on Long Island. No one ever taught me about this cool thing about George Washington. And then they told me it was a friend that lived in the town, Setauket, and he told me that a mother, and I'm a mother, hung up her petticoats as a signal to the spies. I said, "What?" I mean, I couldn't even imagine. It was just like, wow, suddenly history became real life to me. It became like, what would I do in that situation? And I was just hooked. And I fell in love with history, and I specifically fell in love with the people in the Revolution because what they gave, what they sacrificed, it's just amazing.
It is. It is. So, and really, what sparked the interest in, you did two other books for Calkins Creek, and then you ventured into George Washington and Lafayette. And so what really spurred you into writing that book, Revolutionary Friends?
Yeah, here it is, by the way, in case anybody's interested.
Yeah.
A good writer always carries them around in their trunk, their books.
Or on the car.
Oh, yes, I had a wrap on my car. I did. I loved it. So it's funny because it's all research. The research takes you in unexpected places. So when you're researching something like the Revolutionary War, you're learning all kinds of facts that you're not necessarily going to use in one book, but they're fascinating and you might use them in another book. And, especially, in picture books, the scope is extremely limited. That's a whole other subject about writing picture books. They're tough. They look easy, but they're not. So I was actually researching Benedict Arnold, who Washington loved. He really, really loved him. And of course, Benedict Arnold betrayed him. And I'm very interested in psychology. Often, that goes with the humanity of everything. What motivates us to do the things we do? So why would Benedict Arnold betray George Washington, who adored him? Well, researching this, I came across the scene. I call it it is a scene when Washington found out he was betrayed by Arnold, and he just sunk onto the couch in despair, and his head was in his hands. And Hamilton said, "Someone has to get Lafayette. Only Lafayette can comfort Washington." And I said, why is this French guy the only guy that could comfort Washington? So that is literally what made me investigate their relationship. And I just fell in love with it.
Yeah. Well, today we both went to see Hamilton together, where Washington and Lafayette are a part of the musical, and which was great. One outcome of Hamilton was the fact that history is now embraced by more young people, and which is fabulous. And what would you like young kids to get out of Revolutionary Friends? What's the message, or what do you hope they see in the book or see in that relationship?
Well, I think especially in these times, it's really important to embrace our similarities rather than our differences. And Revolutionary Friends is a really strong example of that, because when Lafayette came, he was a foreigner. He was a French teenager, of all things, a teenager came here and paid for a boat against the king's wishes. Sail. I mean, it is extraordinary amount of money, time. He left his family to do this. That's how much he wanted to help us. And Washington really was prepared to reject him because they were kind of sick. All the revolutionary, all the Americans were sick of foreigners, specifically French people, because they were very bossy and snobbish when they came, and they tried to tell them what to do. But Lafayette wasn't like that at all. Lafayette really wanted to help us in any way, and he just adored Washington because Washington was, doing this. He saw the amazing work that Washington was doing. So Washington gave him a chance instead of just discounting him. What if he had just turned him away? We never would have won the war because Lafayette wound up getting the French to join us, and the French were a major reason why we won the war, if not the first and only reason. I think we have to think about embracing each other, despite, so what if one person is from France, and speaks only French, one person speaks English. So what? And in the middle of a war, it was a time of such discord, obviously. As a matter of fact, Lafayette met Washington in one of the worst times when they were surrounded. They were in Philadelphia, and they were surrounded by the British. They knew the British were going to attack. So this was a time when you wouldn't think of establishing a friendship. Even if a friendship would work another time, generally would not work in a moment when everything's so tense and you're freaking out. You're about to be attacked, right? So but yet it blossoms. So isn't it great? It shows you the power of friendship, the power of love, that the human heart can form a beautiful relationship despite the most horrible circumstances. So those are two things.
Yeah, that's very true. And the book is, I think it's 32 pages, but there's a lot of back matter because Lafayette continued to admire and embrace Washington. And maybe you could talk a little bit about when he came back to America to tour the country, and he went to Mount Vernon, and what happened there.
Yeah. That was really sad because after our revolution, there was the French Revolution, which was really horrible, and Lafayette was almost killed, and he wound up in prison for 5 years, I think, in Austria. And his son, actually, Washington took his son, who was named George Washington Lafayette. He took him, he kept him safe in America, but Lafayette was nearly killed, as was his wife. But after all that, he survived. He did come once to see Washington after the Revolution, after the American Revolution, but then after the French Revolution and after all that, then he never was able to see Washington alive again. Washington died rather suddenly, and so when he came. They invited him for a tour of America. He really is America's adopted son, and really rightly so. We need to recognize Lafayette again, like I said. So he came and he went to Mount Vernon, and he went to visit Washington's tomb. And nobody knows exactly what happened in there, but he came out and he was sobbing, and it was his last goodbye. And it's so he wrote about it. His servant, manservant, wrote a whole record of all the things that transpired. And he came out and he said it was the most touching moment he'd ever seen, watching Lafayette return. And it was just like someone had said goodbye to their father.
Yeah, it really points to, and that's the beauty of the book, that it not only tells the story that you told, but also encourages kids to find out more in the back matter and to maybe visit some of these places that are important, because history is so much more vibrant, after the pandemic, when we can get there, to go to see Mount Vernon, to see some of these places where they actually were, or go to Brandywine, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
After Revolutionary Friends, you kind of did an about face and did a book called Revolutionary Rogues. And sort of what led you to that? You've talked a little bit about Benedict Arnold, but talk a little bit about that book.
Here it is, Revolutionary Rogues. Well, as I mentioned, I was researching Benedict Arnold before Lafayette, but then I fell so in love with the relationship of Lafayette and Washington that I got sidetracked and wrote that first. So it's really funny how when you accumulate your research, you never know which way it's going to go, and I find it also exciting that I have to really just read it and say, okay, I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to do this, because I love it all so much. It's just so exciting to me. So I wanted to go back and do Arnold because he's just, when you think of the word traitor, someone betraying you, you think of Benedict Arnold. And why did he do this? And it's very complex. It sounds like, oh, he just, did this, but I wanted to really study the relationship and how it led up to that, and how he would betray. He wasn't only giving, most people know that, or not, maybe some people don't know this either, but he was our greatest general. He was gravely wounded and he couldn't really fight anymore. So he was very angry because he didn't feel he got his due. He wanted much more recognition, and he was very upset that he wanted that he was so injured and crippled. And Washington adored him. There's two people that Washington loved above anyone else, and it was Arnold and it was Lafayette. So I find that very interesting. I find them like they're the two sides of the coin. So Arnold, he got the command of West Point, which was our greatest fort. It was along the Hudson, and really, if you held West Point, you really could control. You had view of the people attacking. The British really needed West Point in order to win the war. So they paid Arnold to betray Washington, and they wanted West Point. But Arnold actually was going to give them a bonus. He was going to give them Washington himself. He found out when Washington was coming there. So he was going to betray the man who personally loved him, really adored him. And so that's pretty stunning, that somebody would go from being, he was our most glorious warrior. If he hadn't done that, we would say, wow, Arnold was definitely the best general by far. Okay. But yet now we only think of him as a traitor. So that's why I wrote it. I just needed to know about that shift.
Yeah. And it's Lafayette and Washington stayed friends. And what happened on both sides, on Arnold's side and on Washington's side, to when their friendship.
Yeah, it's really interesting about Lafayette. The fact that the relationship could endure separation across the continents. It's pretty amazing. That's very hard to maintain, especially they only could write letters. They could, and these letters had to be delivered by boat. When they were separated, but even when they were apart during the war, they were even apart a lot. And they had to write letters to each other.
But they both had ideals that each other admired, which was something that Washington could not. Washington was not good with betrayal.
No, that's for sure.
Story. But anyway, well, all of that is fascinating, and we have another book coming out. We can't escape our love of history, but now you've gone from the Revolutionary War up to the Civil War, and a very different sort of perspective. But it started with Lafayette, so that is the curious thing, that Lafayette has sort of carried you in these last three books. So talk a little bit about Seeking Freedom, that's coming out next week, I think.
2022. Yes, I believe spring. Well, it's funny. Lafayette, this is not funny actually, but Lafayette was really, really against enslavement. Like it was a passion of his to stop enslavement. And he even wrote a letter to Washington asking him to join him in ending slavery. And so he said that if he knew that we were going to become a nation of slavery, he never would have lifted a sword to help us. So when later on, when we were a nation of slavery, he was obviously very upset by it. He always wanted to end slavery. Well, I'm an American Friend of Lafayette, which is an organization that we all meet twice a year when there's not a pandemic. Say we go to Yorktown, because Lafayette is responsible for Yorktown, and we go to Yorktown Day, and then we have an annual meeting. So we were at Yorktown Day in Virginia, and so they always have like festivities. We go places where Lafayette has been, and we visit them and we learn about them. But at this particular day, I was a little upset because they're all couples there. Everybody's married, and I was, the only single one. And it was just getting a little annoying being around all these people. And but I said, I'm going to just go. I'm not going to go. They were going to this place called Fortress Monroe the next day. And I said, I've just had enough. I'm going home. So my friend Bonnie, who was one of the American friends, said, no, you can't go because I know you're going to find your next book tomorrow. I said, I really feel like you're just saying that. But now I have to come. I mean, I have to. Like, I believe in all that stuff. Totally, right? So we went to Fortress Monroe, now called Fort Monroe, but it was Fortress Monroe at the time during the Civil War and earlier. And luckily, one of the American friends was a historian there, so he took us inside Building 1. So it was where Lafayette had stayed when on his tour of America, he stayed in this room in Building 1. And in there's another room where Lincoln stayed during the war when there was a battle. Obviously, there's different times. So in the room where Lafayette stayed, okay, the guy told us the story about Lafayette. It was very cool. Like, I took pictures by the fireplace. I'm like, this is what I love, But then the guy said something that really changed everything for me. He said, before we leave, I want to tell you about another story of something that happened in this room. And he told us about three freedom seekers. They were, it was a night that Virginia seceded. They stole a boat and rowed across the moat, and the Fortress Monroe was the only thing that remained part of the Union. It was actually kind of interesting. Robert E. Lee designed it because he used to be, an American soldier. He designed it after the War of 1812 to be impenetrable, so the Confederates could not penetrate it. So it was kind of ironic. So they went there. Now the thing about the Union always returned people, people seeking freedom. They returned them. I don't know why. That's just what they did. But there was a new general there. It was his first night, General Benjamin Butler, and he did not want to return them. So he was a lawyer. So he decided to call them contraband. And when you call something contraband, you're allowed to confiscate it because it's a weapon being used against you. And they were being used to build, weapon stations against us. So he did it. Everybody was shocked, and they ridiculed the whole thing. They calling them contraband. It was a big joke, but it was the joke that ultimately ended slavery, because this is the thing that really led to the Emancipation Proclamation. There's a man named George Scott in it, a freedom seeker who he was the first African American to be armed in the Civil War, and he is just this amazing man who really gave everything so that everyone could be free. It's a beautiful story. So, and it's all because Lafayette was there, and I believe he brought me there because he was so against slavery. I really think he brought me there.
Well, all of your books tell very human stories, and they're very, very relatable to kids today. I mean, kids, might not have been at a fort, they might not have met George Washington, but they know what it is to sort of rise to the occasion, especially kids that are activists today. So again, thank you so much for talking to us. I wish you all the luck in the world, and it will be fun to finish up the final touches on Seeking Freedom. And best of luck in all you do, Selene.
Well, thank you, Carolyn, for everything. I couldn't imagine working with anybody but you. You're just like, you've just been the best. Finding you is that we are our own revolutionary friendship.
We are revolutionary friends, BFFs.